February 25, 2005, 1:15 p.m. A 59-year-old church council president and Boy Scout leader pulled into his driveway in Park City, Kansas. Within minutes, police cruisers surrounded his home. Dennis Rader stepped out calmly, hands raised. For 3 decades, he had been the BTK Killer, one of America's most sadistic serial murderers. But it wasn't brilliant detective work that caught him. It was a floppy disk, a lie, and his own narcissistic need for attention. This is the story of how a devoted family man, respected community member, and compliance officer systematically tortured and killed 10 people across 3 decades while maintaining the perfect facade of suburban normalcy. This is the chilling chronicle of BTK, bind, torture, kill. What made Dennis Rader finally break his 14-year silence in 2004? Why did he trust the very police he'd taunted for years? And how did one of the most meticulous serial killers in American history make the fatal mistake that would end his reign of terror? The answers reveal a portrait of evil hiding in plain sight, a man so desperate for recognition that he engineered his own capture. Before we unlock the darkest chapters of this investigation, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Here at True Crime Vault, we dive deep into the cases that shaped criminal history. New investigations every week. And if you think you know this case, stay with me. The details are far more disturbing than most people realize. January 15th, 1974. The Otero family should have been safe in their home at 803 North Edgemore Street in Wichita, Kansas. Joseph Otero, 38, worked for the Air Force. His wife Julie, 34, was a homemaker. Their children, Josephine, 11, Joseph Jr., 9, and Carmen, 13, were preparing for school. It was a Tuesday morning, cold and ordinary. At approximately 7:45 a.m., someone cut the phone line outside the house. Dennis Rader had been watching the family for weeks. He knew their routines, their vulnerabilities, their schedules. He had a plan. He had his kit, rope, tape, knives, and a pistol. At 31 years old, Rader was married with 2 young children of his own. He worked for ADT Security Services, installing alarm systems in people's homes. The irony would later become one of the case's most disturbing elements. Rader knocked on the door. When Joseph Otero answered, Rader pushed his way inside, brandishing a pistol. He told the family he was a wanted fugitive who needed a car and money. It was a lie. He had no intention of leaving them alive. What happened over the next several hours represents one of the most horrific crime scenes in Kansas history. According to Rader's own confession decades later, he forced the family into separate rooms. Joseph Otero was strangled first, fighting desperately for his life. Julie was strangled next. 9-year-old Joseph Jr. was found in his bedroom, a plastic bag over his head, strangled with a cord. 11-year-old Josephine was taken to the basement. She was hanged from a sewer pipe. Rader later admitted he masturbated at the scene, achieving sexual gratification from the murders. Charlie, the 15-year-old Otero's son, arrived home from school at approximately 3:45 p.m. He found his family murdered. The 911 call came in at 3:53 p.m. Officers arrived to a scene they would never forget. 4 members of the same family systematically murdered in their own home. There was no forced entry beyond the initial confrontation. Nothing of significant value was stolen. The Otero family dog was found unharmed, locked in a bedroom. The Wichita Police Department had never seen anything like this. The level of planning, the brutality, the sexual component, it all pointed to someone who would kill again. Detectives canvassed the neighborhood. Dozens of interviews yielded no solid leads. Whoever did this had been careful, methodical. The crime scene revealed a killer who knew exactly what he was doing. But there was something else, something that would become BTK's signature. Among the horror, investigators found evidence that the killer had spent time at the scene after the murders. He had rearranged the bodies. He had posed Josephine in the basement. This wasn't just murder. This was performance. 3 months passed. On April 4th, 1974, a man called the Wichita Eagle newspaper. He told them to check a mechanical engineering book in the Wichita Public Library. Inside the book, tucked between pages, was a letter. Written in careful handwriting, it detailed the Otero murders with information only the killer could know. It was signed with a new name he had given himself, BTK. Bind them, torture them, kill them. The letter revealed something terrifying. This wasn't a killer who would fade into anonymity. This was someone who needed recognition, who craved acknowledgement for what he'd done. He described the murders in cold, clinical detail. He expressed frustration that he hadn't received proper credit in the media. He wanted the world to know what he was capable of. Wichita was paralyzed with fear. A serial killer was announcing himself, and he was just getting started. On April 4, 1974, the same day the library letter was discovered, 21-year-old Catherine Bright was returning to her home at 32 and 17 East 13th Street with her 19-year-old brother, Kevin. It was early evening, around 5 p.m. Dennis Rader was waiting inside. He had broken in earlier, preparing the scene, bringing his kit of torture implements. He was ready for his next victim. When Catherine and Kevin entered the home, Rader confronted them with a pistol. He used the same story. Wanted fugitive, needed a car, wouldn't hurt them. He separated the siblings. Kevin was tied up in one room, but Kevin Bright was not going to die that day. He fought back. In the struggle, Rader shot Kevin twice in the face. Incredibly, Kevin survived, breaking free and running from the house, screaming for help despite his injuries. Rader panicked. This was not part of his meticulous plan. He turned his rage on Catherine Bright. She was stabbed multiple times, fighting desperately for her life. 3 stab wounds to her abdomen proved fatal. By the time police arrived, Rader had fled. Catherine Bright died later at Wesley Medical Center. She was 21 years old. Kevin Bright's survival gave investigators their first real lead. He described the attacker. White male, medium build, approximately 5'10", mustache, calm demeanor. A composite sketch was created and distributed throughout Wichita. Detectives now had a witness. They had a description. But in 1974, without DNA technology or advanced forensic techniques, the investigation stalled. For 3 years, BTK went silent. No letters, no murders. Wichita began to breathe again. Some investigators wondered if the killer had moved away, been imprisoned for another crime, or died. This would become BTK's pattern. Long periods of dormancy followed by sudden, terrifying violence. March 17, 1977. The silence shattered. Shirley Vian, 24, was homesick with the flu. Her 3 young children, ages 5, 6, and 8, were with her in their home at 1311 South Hydraulic Avenue. Around 1 p.m. there was a knock at the door. A man claiming to be a telephone repairman needed to check the lines. Shirley Vian let him inside. It was Dennis Rader. Once inside, Rader pulled a pistol. He locked the 3 children in a bathroom, telling them their mother would be fine if they stayed quiet. He tied pillows and toys around the door to muffle sound. Then he turned to Shirley Vian. According to his later confession, he tried to strangle her with a rope, but the rope broke. He used a different cord. Shirley Vian died fighting for her life, fighting to get back to her children. The children remained in the bathroom for hours after Rader left, too terrified to come out. When they finally emerged, they found their mother dead. The 911 call came from a neighbor. The children's statements gave police crucial information. The killer had been calm, methodical, had prepared the scene. He'd spent significant time in the house after the murder. But still, no solid leads, no fingerprints matched any database. The composite sketch led nowhere. BTK was a ghost. Just 3 months later, on December 8, 1977, Nancy Fox, 25, returned to her home at 843 South Pershing Street after work. She was employed at Hellsberg's jewelry store, a popular young woman with her whole life ahead of her. She had no idea Dennis Rader was waiting inside her home. He had broken in hours earlier, positioning himself, preparing his tools. When Nancy entered, Rader confronted her immediately. He was armed, calm, in complete control. According to phone records and his own confession, he forced Nancy to undress. He bound her hands. He strangled her with a belt and nylon stocking. After she died, he posed her body on the bed. Then he did something that demonstrated his chilling arrogance. He drove to a payphone at 8210 East Kellogg and called the Wichita Police Department. The call came in at 8:15 a.m. on December 9th. In a calm, measured voice, Rader told the dispatcher, "You will find a homicide at 843 South Pershing, Nancy Fox." Then he hung up. Police rushed to the address. Nancy Fox was found exactly as the caller described. The killer had not only murdered her, but had called to report his own crime. This level of brazenness shocked investigators. BTK wasn't just killing, he was playing with law enforcement, demonstrating his superiority, his control. In February 1978, BTK sent another letter, this time to KKTV, a local television station. Inside was a poem he had written titled Shirley Locks, a disturbing reference to Shirley Vian. The letter included details about Nancy Fox's murder that hadn't been released to the public. He also included a drawing, a crude sketch of a woman bound and hanging, labeled with the words, "The sexual thrill is my bill." The letter revealed BTK's psychology. He referred to himself as having a monster inside him that required feeding. He claimed he couldn't control his urges. He wanted publicity, wanted his story told. He suggested the media call him BTK. He was branding himself, creating a legend. Police formed a special task force. Hundreds of tips poured in. Detectives worked around the clock. The investigation consumed massive resources. Psychological profilers from the FBI were brought in. The profile suggested white male, 25-35 years old, employed, likely married or had been married, sexually inadequate in normal relationships, needed control and domination to achieve sexual satisfaction. The profile was remarkably accurate, but it described thousands of men in Wichita. In 1979, another letter arrived, this time with more disturbing poetry and details about his crimes. BTK sent letters to multiple media outlets, creating a frenzy of publicity. But after 1979, the letters stopped. The murders stopped. BTK vanished. For 25 years, the investigation went cold. Detectives retired. The task force disbanded. Files were archived. New generations of police officers joined the Wichita Police Department who had never worked an active BTK case. The families of victims lived with unanswered questions, with the knowledge that their loved one's killer was still out there, free, possibly living a normal life. Dennis Rader had not stopped because he was caught. He stopped because he chose to. During this dormancy period, Rader lived the ultimate double life. He was promoted at his job. In 1991, he became a compliance officer for Park City, Kansas, a suburb of Wichita. His job involved enforcing municipal codes, measuring people's lawns, checking for code violations, writing citations for infractions. Neighbors described him as rigid, petty, overly zealous about minor violations. Some called him a bully, but no one suspected him of being a serial killer. He was active in his Lutheran church, Christ Lutheran Church. He served as president of the Congregation Council. He helped with community events, fundraisers, church dinners. He sang in the choir. Fellow parishioners described him as dependable, devout, perhaps a little too self-righteous, but certainly not dangerous. He was a Boy Scout leader, working with young boys in the community. The same hands that had strangled 10 people tied knots and taught wilderness survival. He was married to Paula Dietz since 1971. They had 2 children, a son and a daughter, who grew up never knowing what their father truly was. To them, he was just dad, strict, organized, particular about rules, but present at school events, family dinners, holidays. But the monster, as he called it, never left. Rader continued to relive his crimes, to fantasize, to collect trophies. He kept detailed files on his murders, drawings, photographs he had taken of himself in bondage poses wearing his victims' clothing. He had created an entire secret world, an archive of his dark legacy, and he became obsessed with the idea that he hadn't received the recognition he deserved. In 2004, on the 30th anniversary of the Otero murders, the Wichita Eagle published a series of articles about BTK. The articles speculated whether BTK was dead, imprisoned, or simply dormant. They questioned whether the murders would ever be solved. Dennis Rader read these articles with growing frustration. His crimes were being forgotten. His legend was fading. His ego couldn't tolerate it. On March 19, 2004, the Wichita Eagle received a letter. Inside was a photocopy of a driver's license belonging to Vicki Wagerly, who had been murdered in 1986. At the time, her murder hadn't been connected to BTK. Also included were photographs of Vicki's body at the crime scene, photos only the killer could possess. BTK was back, and he was demanding attention. The Wichita Police Department was stunned. After 25 years of silence, BTK was communicating again. Lieutenant Ken Landwehr, who had been a young officer during the original investigation, was now leading the case. The task force was reactivated. Every resource was mobilized, but investigators faced a critical question. Why now? What had triggered his return? Between March 2004 and February 2005, BTK sent 11 communications to media outlets and police. Each communication became progressively more brazen. He sent packages to Keiki TV hidden in cereal boxes in public locations, directing them with cryptic clues. He sent letters to local media. He communicated through classified ads in the newspaper, creating elaborate games with law enforcement. In one package, he included a word puzzle that, when solved, revealed the location of another package. He sent jewelry belonging to victims. He sent drawings of his fantasies. He sent dolls bound and positioned to represent his murders. Each communication gave investigators more material to analyze: handwriting, paper stock, postage, DNA from saliva on envelopes. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. In January 2005, BTK sent a package to KSS TV hidden inside a cereal box at a Home Depot. Inside was a disturbing doll bound in a manner representing one of his victims. Also included was a letter asking a specific question. Could police trace information from a floppy disk? If they could, he asked them to be honest in a classified ad in the Wichita Eagle. Lieutenant Landwehr and his team saw an opportunity. They placed a classified ad responding, "Rex, it will be okay." They were lying. On February 16, 2005, BTK sent his next communication, dropped in a UPS drop box. It was a purple floppy disk. The task force immediately brought in computer forensics experts. They examined the disk. Most of the files had been deleted, but deletion doesn't mean permanent erasure. Forensic analysis recovered deleted data. Hidden in the metadata of a Microsoft Word document was a name, Dennis, and a link to Christ Lutheran Church. Investigators cross-referenced the information. They obtained a membership directory for Christ Lutheran Church. One name stood out: Dennis Rader, Congregation Council President. A quick background check revealed he lived in Park City, worked as a compliance officer, had no significant criminal record. Could this be BTK? After 31 years, detectives needed DNA. In 2005, DNA technology had advanced significantly since the 1970s. Investigators had preserved DNA from crime scenes, particularly from semen evidence at several murder sites. But they couldn't legally obtain DNA from Rader without probable cause. They needed a creative solution. Rader had a daughter, Carrie, who was in college. In 2004, she had undergone a routine medical procedure at Kansas State University that required a tissue sample. That sample had been preserved. Investigators obtained a court order for the medical records. The familial DNA was tested against the crime scene DNA. The probability that the crime scene DNA belonged to Carrie Rader's father was 99.9999%. They had him. On February 25, 2005, surveillance teams tracked Dennis Rader's movements. He went about his normal day: compliance officer work, lunch, errands. At 1:15 p.m., as he pulled into his driveway at 6220 Independence Street in Park City, police vehicles surrounded him. Officers approached with weapons drawn. Dennis Rader stepped out of his car, raised his hands, and asked calmly, "What took you so long?" He was arrested without incident. He showed no emotion, no surprise, no fear. In his vehicle and home, investigators found his secret archive: detailed journals describing each murder, drawings, photographs, trophies from victims, including jewelry and identification cards, elaborate self-bondage photographs where Rader had dressed in women's clothing and bound himself in sexual poses, masks, wigs, and a fully stocked hit kit containing ropes, tape, knives, and ligatures. Ready for his next victim. The evidence was overwhelming. Rader was charged with 10 counts of first-degree murder. The four Otero family members, Catherine Bright, Shirley Vian, Nancy Fox, and 3 others whose murders had not previously been connected to BTK. Maureen Hedge, murdered in 1985, Vicki Wegerle, murdered in 1986, and Dolores Davis, murdered in 1991. The legal question became not if he would be convicted, but whether he would plead guilty or force a trial. Rader's attorney, Stephen Osborne, negotiated with prosecutors. Kansas had reinstated the death penalty in 1994, but it wasn't retroactive. Rader's murders occurred before and after that date, creating legal complexity. However, prosecutors were confident they could secure 10 consecutive life sentences without parole. On June 27, 2005, Dennis Rader appeared in Sedgwick County District Court. The courtroom was packed with victims' families, media, and citizens who had lived in fear for decades. Rader stood at the defendant's table, wearing an orange jumpsuit, shackled at the wrists and ankles. Judge Gregory Waller asked how he pleaded to each count of murder. What happened next shocked even seasoned prosecutors. Rader pleaded guilty to all 10 counts. But he didn't simply say guilty and sit down. He insisted on describing each murder in chilling detail. For over 30 minutes, he recounted the murders in a flat, emotionless monotone, referring to his victims by first names as if they were acquaintances. He used technical terms like putting them down and projects. He described the murders as if discussing home improvement tasks. He explained that he had selected victims by trolling, driving around neighborhoods looking for potential targets. He called it project hunting. He described breaking into homes to prepare scenes, waiting for hours, stalking victims for weeks before striking. He detailed his sexual fantasies, his need to achieve orgasm through killing. He showed no remorse, no emotion, no acknowledgement of the devastation he'd caused. Victims' families wept. Some had to leave the courtroom. Rader, meanwhile, seemed to enjoy the attention, the opportunity to finally tell his story in full. His attorney sat silent, understanding this was part of the plea agreement. Rader would spare families the trauma of a trial, but he would have his moment in court. On August 18, 2005, the sentencing hearing began. It lasted 2 days. Victims' family members gave impact statements. They described the decades of pain, the sleepless nights, the destroyed sense of security, the lives that would never be lived. Shirley Vian's children, now adults, described growing up without a mother. The Otero siblings who survived described the loss of their entire family. Kevin Bright, permanently scarred from being shot in the face, described 31 years of wondering when the killer would be caught. Judge Waller gave each family member all the time they needed. Rader sat impassively, occasionally glancing at speakers but showing no visible emotion. When given the opportunity to speak, Rader offered a brief hollow statement about his demons and factors beyond his control. He never apologized. He never took full responsibility. He never showed genuine remorse. Judge Waller sentenced Dennis Rader to 10 consecutive life sentences, a minimum of 175 years in prison, with no possibility of parole. He was 60 years old. He would die in prison. Since his incarceration, Dennis Rader has been housed at El Dorado Correctional Facility in Kansas. He remains in protective custody due to the nature of his crimes and his notoriety. He has given several interviews over the years, each one revealing more about his psychology, his methods, his fantasies. These interviews have been controversial. Some argue they provide valuable insight for criminal psychology and law enforcement training. Others believe they give Rader exactly what he always wanted: attention, recognition, infamy. In interviews, Rader has revealed additional details about his crimes. He has described murders he planned but never executed. He has talked about victims he stalked extensively before abandoning those plans for unknown reasons. He has discussed his Factor X, his term for whatever compulsion drove him to kill. He has compared himself to other serial killers, ranking himself among them. His narcissism remains intact, his need for recognition undiminished even in prison. His family was devastated by his arrest and confession. Paula Rader filed for divorce immediately, granted in July 2005. She has never spoken publicly about her ex-husband. His children have maintained silence, attempting to rebuild their lives away from their father's shadow. His brother has stated that the family feels profound sympathy for the victims' families and shame for what Dennis did. The question that haunts investigators, psychologists, and the public is simple but profound. How? How did a serial killer live among society for 31 years, holding positions of trust and authority, raising a family, attending church, leading scout troops, all while harboring such darkness? How did no one see it? The answer is disturbing. Dennis Rader was extraordinarily compartmentalized. He genuinely fulfilled his roles as father, husband, church member, and compliance officer most of the time. The murders were his secret life, kept entirely separate. He had created such a rigid division between his personas that even his family never suspected. In some ways, he may have believed his own performance, convinced himself that his normal life was real, and the murders were something separate, something beyond his control. But the truth revealed through his own confessions is that Rader always had control. He chose when to kill. He chose when to stop. He chose when to communicate. He chose when to resume. The monster he described was not an external force. It was him. It was always him. The BTK case transformed criminal investigation techniques. The use of familial DNA to identify Rader became a landmark moment in forensic science. The recovery of deleted metadata from digital storage devices became standard procedure. The psychological profile of long-dormancy serial killers was refined. Law enforcement learned valuable lessons about offender communication, about how to maintain long-term investigations across decades, about the importance of preserving evidence even when cases go cold. Today, the families of BTK's victims continue to heal, though the scars will never fully fade. Organizations supporting victims of violent crime have used the BTK case to advocate for victims' rights, for improved investigation resources, for better support systems. Wichita has moved forward, but the city will never forget the 3 decades when evil walked among them, undetected and unchallenged. Dennis Rader remains in his cell. He will die there. He will never again walk free. He will never again hurt anyone. But the legacy of his crimes, the trauma inflicted on families and an entire community, that legacy endures. This case reminds us that evil often wears the most ordinary face. It attends church on Sunday. It helps neighbors with yard work. It enforces municipal codes. It lives next door. The most terrifying monsters are not the ones in horror movies. They're the ones who blend in, who hide in plain sight, who seem completely normal until the mask finally slips. If this investigation into one of America's most notorious serial killers has impacted you, make sure to subscribe to True Crime Vault for more in-depth case analyses. Hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. What aspect of this case disturbs you most? How do you think someone could maintain such a double life for so long? Let me know your perspective. And remember, these aren't just stories. These are real people whose lives were stolen, real families who still grieve, and real communities forever changed. These cases deserve to be remembered, examined, and learned from. That's why we're here. That's what True Crime Vault is all about, unlocking the cases that must never be forgotten.